Hi. So this time I am going to pretty much summarize what the chapter on the understanding on how people learn and think. You have read the different perspectives, and essentially we are going to surround ourselves with three. Now, I do have to tell you, there are different currents that have come across in the last few years. But essentially, we're going to focus on three different theories: the cognitivism, the constructivism, and the behaviorism. And essentially, if you have already read the chapter, you know that the cognitivism essentially takes us back to this resemblance of our brain or the way we think, just like a computer. So that's the best analogy that a lot of thinkers have come up with. Part of the reason is because our brain is focusing on a lot of channels and bringing a lot of information in. But essentially, when it comes to instructional design, the way we use and interpret the cognitivism is, if you think about how we have learned up to this point, usually we have a program or a track laid out for us. We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And along the way, we have instructions, we have ways of thinking and the ways of adapting information and applying it. So technically we have a roadmap, and we have become so accustomed to that in some instances when we ask people to come up with new ways of doing things, they are still expecting the same model. Now, if we move along to the next one, which is the constructivism, that is probably a little bit more malleable to what I was just talking about. So when people want to take information and adapt it to what they know, or vice versa, if the instructional designer wants to give information and wants the person, the learner, to construct information according to how they perceive it, that is essentially that constructivism theory. And essentially, we can use either one of those. Actually, I will come back to that in just a second. But let me just talk about the last piece, which is that behaviorism. So the whole idea of behaviorism is that less abstract thinking requires us to model behaviors or actions that we can actually see and perceive. So as humans, we see these things or we see these actions, and it's a lot easier for us to interpret them and acquire them and then replicate them. So if you think about an assembly line, if you think about a customer service experience, if you think about complying with keeping records of actions in the manufacturing floor or in the packaging environment, in the distribution chain, you can definitely see those things much better applied as a behaviorism. However, there is always a splash of cognitivism, and in some cases, when we want adults to discover and make their own connections, that's when we bring that salt of constructivism. Now, I said I was going to come back to the constructivism because I am going to introduce you to two new terms, or perhaps one familiar and the other one unheard of, and they are usually mismatched. But this is pretty much one of those things where you begin to really dive deeper into the theory and into the framework of academia when it comes to adult learning. So precisely the difference between adult learning and learning as children and younger generations is the difference between two terms. Pedagogy is usually what we have heard, and we have heard a lot of really good practitioners and psychologists and academics talk about psychology. As a matter of fact, child psychology is very well versed, and we can find a lot of information about it. But when it comes to adults, we have a new term, and well, new for us, but really it's been around for a long time. The science of instruction or learning for adults is called andragogy, different than pedagogy. And the biggest difference between the two, once again, is that the andragogical perspective is the one science that explores a way in which adults learn. So now, we have the andragogical perspective here on one hand, and on the other we're going to bring the different theories. The theories are applied regardless of age. It doesn't really matter. And as a matter of fact, some practitioners have said that andragogy is really no different than pedagogy because we still teach people or we educate people. I 100% agree. But the difference between those two up to this point, and if you read in several journals, etc., is that andragogy is specifically going to look into how we lay out information for adults. And that's why I'm referring back to the theories. Because adults essentially want to learn information only when they need it. If we begin pushing information when adults don't really need it, we are asking them for competing priorities. If that is not the task at hand, chances are they are going to discard it, or they are going to just send it to long-term memory, and it is going to take some time to bring it back in. So why are we talking about this? So think about it. In previous conversations, we talked about instructional design is needed because the cost of training, if we bring it from outside, is very expensive. So companies want to have somebody in-house that can do instructional design or developing learning and training. But in addition, we don't want to just create it and have it in there for people to consume but not use it. Remember, we talked about the return on investment? So one big component of adult learning is precisely to put information only when the adult needs it, so they can consume a minimal amount of time acquiring that information where they can turn around quickly and use it. If we present information and the adult turns around and doesn't use it for weeks or even days, we are pretty much wasting time, because what is going to happen is that adult is going to have to consult that information again. So think about this. Have you ever used YouTube as a resource to learn to do something? How to fix a flat tire on a bicycle, or how to change a certain plumbing fitting, or how to rewire a switch on a box electrical wise, or even just how to clean a sink, or how to declog a sink. We are not going around going, gee, I think today I'm going to look at YouTube and see how I can declog a pipe, when actually all my pipes are working in the house. Why do I need to do that? Obviously, I can look at it. Absolutely, I can find it. But it's not going to do me any good. So chances are, when that in fact happens, months down the road, yep, you're right, we're going to have to go back to YouTube and look at it again. So that's no different. And that's why the andragogical perspective that I am asking you to use is precisely with that clinical eye, thinking about, we're going to put information in front of users or in front of learners as they need it. So that has to do with the sequencing of information, but more importantly, when you get to that implementation phase, you really want to think about, do you want to deploy the entire content? Do you want to have your learners look at all the content at once, or do you want them to see content as they progress, or as they need it, or as the assembly line needs it, or as the customer experience policy is dictating, right? So that's where we go back to that cognitivism and behaviorism and constructivism. So now that we know that we are preparing information to be presented to an adult only when they need it, the next step we have to apply is figuring out which one of these theories is best fitting. And then the last 2 cents that I'll give you today on this video chat is, we cannot think as instructional designers that one single theory is going to be enough. As a matter of fact, as instructional designers, you will probably have to juggle between the 3. Do a little bit of cognitivism to set up the stage, perhaps do a little bit of behaviorism to model and show what is it that you expect the learner to do. And in some cases, you will probably give them a constructivist approach, where you're going to give them data points and you're going to ask them to add the data together and construct their own knowledge or their own application, such as a case study. Okay, I hope this had made sense, that you enter some comments in the discussion board that I'm going to put instructions in the announcement. Until next time.